Welcome back, Anthony. How you doing this morning?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing real well. Thanks for joining me. I'm excited to connect with you, albeit virtually. We've been longtime friends and
Yep.
colleagues. Just so everyone knows up front that I was at Gap, as many of you might know, in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and Anthony came in and cleaned everything up and made everything look great. So, and since then he's been on journey at Dropbox and now Tanium, leading workforce planning and analytics. So, if you would introduce yourself and a little bit about what we're talking about today.
Yeah, thanks, Al. And privilege is mine. I think I just saw you were top 100 most influential HR tech folks. So congratulations on that. I saw that call
Thank you.
out. Very exciting. So yeah, like Al said, my name is Anthony Walter. I lead workforce planning and analytics and have led that at Tanium for the past 3.5 years. So if you all don't know what Tanium is, we are sort of one of the number one kind of cybersecurity companies that helps well-respected, biggest companies in the world protect their teams, their endpoints, workflows from cyber security threats. So it's an exciting space to be in, and a lot of kind of people implications and how we plan for the workforce of the future there. So excited to talk a little bit about how we've built the team at Tanium, how we've brought together workforce planning and workforce analytics disciplines, and sort of the advantages of that.
Well, it's the case. I'm always excited to talk with you. I am really curious. Given the title of our discussion, workforce planning and analytics, bringing it together, because many have it's separate. You have workforce planning oftentimes in talent acquisition, and it's more attuned to headcount planning. Oftentimes, people analytics is throughout the employee life cycle. Sometimes learning has its own separate thing going on. So, why is bringing workforce planning and analytics important to you there at Tanium?
Yeah, I mean, to me, workforce planning really is about getting the right people in the right role at the right time. And I know it's a bit of a high level kind of platitude, but it really is true. You need to understand sort of the business strategy and the right people to get you there, and the right skill sets you need, and locations and type of contractors or full time. And to me, I don't think you can really do that without really strong business and workforce intelligence. And so for us, it really made sense to bring the two together. And also, I think it gives, workforce analysts a good, well-rounded view of, they're not just in a silo crunching numbers on headcount or attrition, but they're actually kind of inextricably linked with the business and where we're going as a company and what our core priorities are, and how their analytics helps get us there. So for me, it made sense to bring the two together and really shed light on it's not just data or numbers on the page. It actually makes an impact for the overall business, and so that's how we've structured it here. And I think more and more companies are doing that.
Well, thank you for teeing it up that way. And by the way, if you're listening, watching, enter your comments or questions into the chat on YouTube or LinkedIn or wherever you're viewing this, and we'll take your questions as we go. I do want to call this out, is that many of us in the discipline over the years have focused on the process by which we do the work, and been sometimes a little blind to the diverse needs of our internal customers, plural. So when you say they,
Yep.
uh, who is they for you? Is there a governance body, steering committee? Is the HR leadership team? Who are you serving?
Yeah, I think our primary customers are probably, Tanium's executive leadership team. And we also work really closely with finance. I think you need that linkage between, headcount and attrition and the cost of the workforce. But I would say our leadership team and sometimes our board is really our core partners and customers. And we help them, with a lot of questions around, you know, I mean, especially for Tanium as a high growth company, what is the effectiveness and the efficiency of our hiring? what is the optimal org design and span of control. And again, it all starts with really just working with them to understand, okay, what are their priorities? It's going to be different from, our chief product officer to, our head of engineering to our chief customer officer. They all have different priorities and different needs. But they also, have core problems they're trying to solve for. And so we just work really closely with them, on a regular basis, and especially as they're doing kind of their annual headcount planning to really think through what they need to execute on their individual strategies and how that ladders up at the company wide overall.
So here we are early in the conversation, and you already mentioned finance and IT and facilities,
Mm-hmm.
all these many times disparate groups
Yeah.
in function. So was this something that you had to create and bring together, or was this group already formed and you just brought insight that helped them get aligned? What did that look like? How much like selling did you have to do?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think whenever you first stand up a new capability, which we did at Tanium, had to build out the capability. It wasn't there when I first started. I think you kind of have to educate, the different stakeholders on what is even workforce planning. I think it's called different things in different places, and so. I think naturally there's some times where we do get more involved. Like I said, during the headcount planning cycles, all those stakeholders are getting together and really talking through, what are the interdependencies? If we increase by X number of sales reps, what does it mean for pre-sales engineers? What does it mean for our support functions and how much they have to grow? And so naturally, it brings the teams together. And I think workforce planning is in a unique position to see that enterprise-wide connection and build models based on that and the different levers we can pull around our workforce, which isn't always there. Sometimes you have folks working in silos, asking for disparate headcount needs, not always understanding the workforce implications across the enterprise. And so we can certainly help with that. And I think we've been successful in bringing folks together to think about that.
Oh, getting me all excited because because I'll just say why I'm excited. Number one, we can do so much now. When I go back, 10, 20 years, eh, yeah, bulk of our time was spent managing the data and
Mm-hmm.
creating data and integrating systems, and it's very tactical at the end of
Yeah.
the day. And every once in a while, on an event-driven basis, we were able to do some more sophisticated study that had some predictive element or
Mm-hmm.
scenario planning, to it. But now we can do this at a much more frequent basis with much more
Yeah.
data because the tools are better and all that. So at what frequency are you pushing these deliverables to that executive leadership team? Is it ad hoc? Is it on a monthly basis? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're first starting, it's a little bit of around, okay, what are the key milestones where you're delivering a lot of these insights, and then as you build the function and as you get more credibility and known within the business, then that's I think where some of the demand comes in. It's a little bit more ad hoc based on each of the needs. So I would say there are key milestones around our annual engagement surveys and different employee listening things we have going on, headcount planning, board meetings, executive leadership, kind of quarterly reviews. Those we're intimately involved with. And then, as certain things come up, maybe we have a hiring surge in engineering, and we really need to understand, what level of engineers do we need to bring in? What type of skills, front end, back end,
Mhm.
cloud, et cetera. Those are the type of kind of ad hoc requests that we get from the leaders to really understand and drive some kind of data driven decisions around the people and the skill sets needed. So I would say it's a little bit of both, but we always have kind of a regular cadence of key milestones where we get involved with.
Got it. And so a quick story, and Sharif, I'm going to weave your question into this. I had the great privilege of serving Walt Disney Animation Studios about 10 years ago now. Frozen was in production. They were just wrapping up
Nice.
Wreck-It Ralph, and Big Hero 6 was on the heels of Frozen.
Yeah.
And without going into the full story, one of the reasons I was brought in is to help facilitate workforce planning.
Mhm.
And we tried to have workforce planning discussions in this very fast-paced organization. And every time we talked about recruiting strategies, 6 months to a year out, not even 18
Yeah.
months to 2 years out, the gravity of the here and now just derailed the conversations. Like, I
Yeah.
can't talk about this because I need people next week. And
Yep.
so what we ended up doing is carving out a meeting. I'm going to use the term talent deployment.
Mhm.
Although at the time we called it strategic casting, or they called it strategic casting. Then workforce planning was a separate meeting that had a different time horizon with different
Mhm.
outcomes as a result. So we created these distinctions, different people in the room, although many of them were the same. The
Yep.
purpose of the meetings were different, and we had yet something different called workforce visioning that looked 3 to 5 years out. So this is a tee up for Sharif's question. What is
Mhm.
the time horizon that you look at when you talk about workforce planning? And the
Yeah.
sprinkle on top of that is, when you think about workforce planning, are you not only thinking about hiring from the outside, but are you thinking about internal mobility and other ways work
Yeah.
is going to get done?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great question. Honestly, I think it really does depend on the organization. And that's one of the lessons learned I've had is, what's right for Gap, which is a more stable business. It's been around a long time. It's pretty cyclical. They understand, how many people they need to hire seasonally. Your horizon could be 3, 5 years out. For Tanium, things change quarterly almost,
Mhm.
and you really have to meet the business where it's at. So at Tanium, we look at about a year out typically in our planning, as we start to understand our corporate goals, our company goals, and each of the functional goals, and what they need to accomplish in the next year. And then we revisit that on a quarterly basis to make sure things haven't changed. The product roadmap may change. We may go into a different segment or market or vertical. So it really does depend on the type of company, how quickly you're hiring, things are changing, whether your business is seasonal, predictable, stable, or if you are having at Tanium, we have new modules coming out all the time. We're going more down market. So things are changing a lot more quickly. And so something you put together at the beginning of the year is not going to be as relevant, even one quarter in. So you have to constantly refine it and revisit it. And that's where the analytics comes in too. You have to understand, okay, are we getting the ROI from our original strategy? Are we accomplishing the goals that we wanted to? If not, we need to pivot the way we're approaching things. And so I think that's where you can kind of bring the two together. And then to your second question, yes, we look at both things. We look at internal mobility. We're really linked with our talent management team to understand, succession planning. What are the key roles, critical talents, skill sets needed? Who are our top performers? Where are they in their development? Who's our future pipeline of leaders? We have a really robust intern program where we brought in a lot of folks who've done really, really well early in career. And it's been a really successful pipeline of key individuals in the organization who have grown, throughout the years. So you have to bring in both sides, the internal, and then also not even just external hiring, but the external macro environment, and how that plays a key part in your workforce planning. Right now, we're seeing, we've seen the Great Resignation and a job seekers market, but now we're seeing, I think, a little bit of the tightening of the labor market. And how does that change your strategy? How does that change your approach? You need to factor in kind of all of these things when you're planning it out.
I love it. And I'm going to ask you about tools, technology, data that you use to facilitate the discussion. But before I do, I want to ask you, that quarterly meeting
Mhm.
or that frequency, what does that look like? Is it you're presenting your insights and ideas and you're spending a day talking about it? Do you have an hour on a super packed agenda? What is that discussion? Is it a discussion, or is it, hey, here's your information, here's your insight, go and think about it, then discuss on your own? I'm just really curious about what that event looks like.
Yeah. So luckily, we've established what we call quarterly business reviews, which is basically a review of both our financial and workforce metrics. So how did we do end the quarter? Key financial metrics, KPIs. And then also, what does that mean for our headcount, our workforce planning? How many sales reps we need to accomplish our revenue goals. And we bring the executive leadership team together for that on a quarterly basis for about an hour and a half, so that everyone has visibility into the financial, the workforce metrics, the product roadmap, how things are changing, the interdependencies. And what that really does is feed into our go forward headcount plan. So at that point, after we've solidified that, then we meet with finance, our HR business partners, our talent acquisition team, all together to talk through these revised plans, the details behind them, because recruiting has to go out, make changes based on that. HR business partners, need to make changes. So we really make sure that we first align at the leadership team level, have that integrated discussion, and then it flows down to the teams that are really responsible on executing on those headcount plans.
Yeah, it's a very kind of reasonable approach. It sounds like
Yeah.
it's just, the knowing doing gap in this space. I think we're all too familiar with it. It's like we can talk about it, but to actually make it happen and make it happen at scale and speed in a sustainable way is certainly a challenge. I want to go back to the tech and
Hmm.
data and who you work with, and
Hmm.
share to the extent that you feel comfortable, of course. But here's the thing that I want to put forth and get your
Yeah.
response to is that when we first started in this field, it was wrestling a bunch of data sets, putting it together, and doing basic cluster analysis, visualizing,
Hmm.
creating reports, and pushing it out. Uh, and there was a handful of solutions that we'd be using.
Yeah.
Now when we talk about employee experience, when we talk about talent intelligence or labor market analytics or talent market analytics, when we talk about employee listening and the frequency of surveying and pulse surveys, then when we talk about passive data collection with O&A and all, there's all these possibilities.
Yeah.
So in my view, we have to be an educated shopper and know how to bring this ecosystem together to get the insight that we need so we can deliver the results and insights to our internal customers. What are your thoughts there, particularly with workforce planning? Who are you leveraging, if you don't mind you sharing? And if you don't want to call out specifically, what's the nature of the data that you are using?
Yeah, I mean, so we leverage a lot of the information, obviously, from our HRIS, but I would say that we don't use a lot of the reporting directly from it. We pull a lot of the information, like you said, we have to bring it all together, right? And so we pull a lot of that into a data warehouse, and so you know we have our attrition data, our hiring data, from our recruiting system being pulled into that.
Mhm.
We have our headcount data, our financial data, all of this sort of brought into one data warehouse. And, we sit a data visualization tool, Power BI, on top of that to kind of bring it all together in a way that's obviously easily consumable. In addition to that, we have our engagement platform where we do a lot of our employee listening, and actually, that has a lot of in-house capability there. I'll call it out Glint. We use Glint. I've been using that for 10 years. So I think, for that, we keep the data anonymous. So we don't pull it in outside of the tool at all. We want to maintain that anonymity, but it has a lot of in-house kind of analytics that we leverage as well. And at the aggregate level, combine with our other data sets as well.
I mean, 10 years, you're a veteran with Clint.
Maybe
What
not
what
that long, maybe 6 years, but
yeah.
6, 7 years. But it's been. I mean, I think a lot of those tools have come so far. Whether it's Glint, Culture others. It's great to see them integrating NLP and a lot of that where in the past we had to like export all the comments and try to figure out the
Yeah.
sentiment and all that. It's all built in these days, so it makes it a lot easier, and you can get to from insights to action a lot quicker.
Considering that, how involved are you with HRIT decisions?
Yeah.
Do you have a partner there? Are you an influencer there? Are you the owner of those decisions? What does that look like?
Yeah, we partner really closely with IT. We do have kind of an HRIT. I won't even call it a team. It's one person. We're very lean and mean at Tanium. So, but he sits in IT, does an amazing job, and we're part of those conversations as part of the renewals. A lot of those, HR systems sit within our budget, and so we have ownership of the discussions around whether we want to renew, bring in new ones, things like that. And then IT, obviously we work with them to suss out all the requirements and things like that. So it's a really good partnership we have, and it's been great. And we've done a lot of work to bring more and more of what we have together into a centralized kind of area and not have a lot of disparate tools, which I think also helps. Sometimes you see that tool sprawl start to happen,
Yeah.
and it can happen right under your nose, right? And then you say like, hey, why do we have 4 different survey tools, or why do we have so we've done a lot of work there, and I think it's led to a better outcome.
And when you say work, for me, that translates into governance and just making sure that you're on top of what you're
Yeah,
doing and not making conscious decisions there. So,
yeah.
kudos to you. So I know we don't have much time, and I can talk to you all day. I'm just like, there's so many things that are popping to mind here because I love the concept, frankly, and I'll own my own bias here
Hmm.
of bringing these two together.
Yeah,
I think that it's been long overdue in most organizations. So again, I'm just going to call out my bias. Uh, I'm curious as we move forward, and I know you have a slide on this, around the future of workforce planning
yeah,
and, people analytics. Yeah, how do you see, and correct me if I'm wrong, yes, Tanium is unique in terms of size and agility and all that, but not only for your work there at Tanium, but for the discipline,
yeah.
what do you see as being a natural evolution of workforce planning and analytics?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the if you would have asked me this, a couple years ago, it would have been, or maybe even longer, it would have been like, well, it's great just to see it. Companies have these functions, right? It's great to have a workforce analytics team or a workforce planning team. So that in itself is growth. But now I think it's more around, how do you move from just getting these ad hoc requests to actually being part of those conversations? You're the proverbial, you have a seat at the table. How do you shape the business strategy? I think it's easy to become order takers. You get a request, you take it in, you fulfill it. But how do you move beyond that to say, where the leaders are bringing you into the conversations to say, hey, I'm thinking about executing on our product strategy, and it looks like this over the next 6 to 12 months. Can you give me some data on whether we actually have the skill sets? What does the external labor market look like? What locations should we recruit from? And how does that shape what we actually might be able to execute in Q1 versus Q2? Those are the type of conversations you want to be a part of versus, hey, can you give me the latest headcount for the last 3 years? You hope to automate that and just have that at the fingertips and then be involved in these more strategic discussions. So I think, for me, it's moved beyond just having these capabilities, which is great for a lot of companies, but how do you now get integrated into those business planning and strategy conversations where you can really shape the trajectory of the company? And that's where you want to be. And that's what I hope the future is.
Thank you for that. I believe that people analytics leaders, workforce planning leaders, we have to have a overarching naming convention,
Yeah,
but we're uniquely positioned to facilitate those discussions
absolutely.
because we
Yeah,
have proprietary data that is not only around our current workforce, but visibility into labor markets, which, to your
yeah.
point, informs location strategy and where we're going to struggle to hire. So
Mhm.
recruiting strategy, and on down the line. What do you see as the barriers for this happening? In
I
not
mean,
only not Tanium, because obviously you're doing it, but elsewhere
mhm.
based on your visibility into the space.
I think general awareness, honestly, I think we still, and I don't know if it's a branding or what it is, but workforce planning, the concept is sometimes a little heady, right? It's what does this actually mean? So really getting in and having these conversations and being tactical with the leaders of, this is what it actually means. Here's an example of a workforce plan. I know it's going to change in, a month or 2 months because the business changes, but I'm here to support you. So I think some of the barriers is just education of the value it can bring, what sort of data you have available, the ability, and this is very fundamental, is sometimes half the battle is accurate data and a single source of truth. If you're coming out with attrition data and another team's coming out with attrition data or headcount data, who's the believe? What data do we use to inform our decision? So to me, that's always been a big barrier, and where you should focus on first is getting the data right, centralized, single source of truth. It's not the sexiest stuff, but it's actually very critical in building credibility for the function. And I think that's often a barrier that gets overlooked or quickly, folks want to jump to predictive analytics or whatever it may be, but you got to get the fundamentals right. And sometimes a simple headcount report, when you haven't had good data in the past, is a huge win for you and for the function, because it starts to get you in those conversations that can lead to more strategic work.
Absolutely love it. Can you do me a favor and bring up your lessons learned, biggest impact slide? And as you do, tee that up, I'm going to bring up Sharif's question, which is going to have to be the last one before we wrap. And just focusing on the last one here, what analytics will add to the workforce planning process? If you're having those together, is that actually, I'll just let you take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you don't bring them together, you're going to miss a lot of historical trends, but also, like I was talking about, the interdependency. So I'll just bring up an example. So if we're hiring 100 sales reps, and we typically know that more sales reps should lead to more pre-sales engineers and should lead to a certain support ratio of IT or whatever it may be. If you haven't modeled out and built out those forecasts and understand those linkages and what they mean for the organization, and you're building in a silo of, hey, I'm just building a workforce plan for the sales team. If you don't have the data behind that to support it, then you're going to end up with a situation where your workforce is not able to execute on its goals, and you're out of whack. And a lot of times it's too late when you start to realize that you haven't brought these two together, you haven't brought the teams together, and you didn't have the data around it. And I also think, benchmarks help a lot. Having, that external data around the macro environment and what's happening, that can inform the strategy. So I think about it makes it real in a lot of times. So when you're doing planning, it's often a strategic exercise, right? And you're thinking about scenario planning, but if it's not backed by the data, it makes it very difficult to make it very tactical and understand the trends. So I think you need to bring the two together. And also, last thing I'll say is a lot of it's also around the cost data. You can have, and it's a two-way street. You can have the headcount data without the cost data, and the cost data without understanding broader workforce implications or skill sets, things like that. So you really got to work with your finance partners to bring together the two. And oftentimes that's missed in just a high-level strategic workforce planning conversation.
Outstanding. Well, I really appreciate you sharing. I'm going to bring up this last slide. I know we're starting to wrap here, but you want to go through these real quick? And Dave, thanks for joining. Victoria, thanks for joining. But Anthony, lessons learned.
Yeah, I touched on a couple of these. Meet the business where it's at. Don't go in saying, hey, best practices say workforce planning should look out 3 to 5 years and you should have X, Y, Z. You got to understand where the company's at in its growth and where it's at with its data, et cetera. Meet it where it's at and build from there. Make sure the data is credible. That's how you get your own credibility. Don't just hand off dashboards or analytics. You need to enable your users on how to understand it and when and where to use it. And then, don't just be an order taker. Again, try to understand the question your requesters trying to ask. And then you can be the expert in understanding and letting them know about the data they need. So those are just some of the high level lessons learned. There's a million more I've learned throughout my career, but those are top of mind for me.
Thank you so much. But I'm going to just pick up and just emphasize that last one. constantly encourage those who are in the field, whether they be experienced or just starting out, is have the conversation first.
Hmm.
Don't try and just guess and hope it hits the mark.
Yep.
Engage your internal customers, learn where their energy is, what their hypotheses are, and go then source the data and do the analytics that are going to help answer that question. So yeah, I just want to
Absolutely.
celebrate that. So
Yeah.
Anthony, thanks for being your awesome self.
Thanks,
Enjoy
Al.
the long holiday weekend coming up. You
You
have
as
any
well.
special plans?
Packing. I'm moving, so moving back to San Francisco. Super excited, but doesn't make for the most exciting weekend. But that's how it'll
Well,
be spent.
it'll be great to have you closer. So
Absolutely.
all the best with that. And again, thank you for sharing. You be well. Yeah.
Yeah, you too. Thanks,
All right. See
everyone.
ya. All right.
Bye.
Bye.